Okay, welcome back to these specials. Now this one is concerned with the hardware I've got. Now I've got to admit, when it comes to being a collector, I'm not as bothered, as you can tell, with the hardware as I am with the games. However, I do still have a fair few of quite interesting things. The first things that we need to concern ourselves with are something that I have shown you before in some of my reviews, and these are the adapters. Now these are needed to play US games on a UK Nintendo, and I've got three of them. I've got the universal adapter by Daytel, then I've got the expert version, which I don't know how it's different, and then one of these crappy things. Okay, I've got three because sometimes it depends on what game you're going to play as to which adapter you actually need to use, because they don't all work for every single Super Nintendo game. However, those are not the most interesting things. The first thing to notice about my controllers is that I don't actually have an official Super Nintendo controller. I've got this one, which is probably the closest one I've got, but is a slight shape and is by LMP. LMP Gamester SN6, obviously. That's the one I use most often because it is most similar to a Super Nintendo controller. The problem with the official ones is that you try and get them from eBay or something and then they are a complete rip, and I just don't see the point of paying, you know, 30 or 40 pounds for 4 buttons. So I don't have an original one. I do also have this one. It's a Competition Pro. I don't ever use this one. I don't like the D-pad. It's kind of a circle thing. It's a bit rubbish, to be honest. And then I've also got, as you may have seen in my World Class Rugby review, I've got a Imagineer Game Commander, which is one of those turbo pads. It's got all the buttons and stuff on it that make you play amazing, apparently. I've also got a couple of massive controllers. The first one, again, you probably saw in my World Class Rugby review, is a Super Advantage, which is kind of pretty awesome, if I'm honest. It doesn't have a box. I bought it off Amazon from somebody. Very happy with it. It is pretty awesome. It's a bit cumbersome, as I find these massive pads to be, but then I guess if you're one of these people who played a lot of games in the arcades when you were younger, then actually it's probably spot on. The most recent acquisition I've got is a Super Nintendo Scoremaster, and its box in pretty good condition. And like the Donkey Kong games that I was saying about in the last video, this was given to me. It was a donation. I like donations, mainly because I don't have to pay anything. I haven't yet tried this. I'm desperate to give it a go, something like Super Street Fighter, because I think it would be amazing. The last thing to say about the controllers is this one, because it's not something I'd ever seen before I got this one. It's actually a wireless controller for the Super Nintendo. As you can imagine, back in the 90s, the wireless controllers weren't that good. Not like nowadays. But it runs off, I think it's AA or AAA batteries. And you have to plug this into your Super Nintendo. So it's not exactly wireless. But I suppose if you don't have a wire long enough, if you don't have one of those connector wires that is massive, then at least you could probably play in bed. Apart from the controllers and the adapters, the only other things I have in hardware-wise is I have a Game Genie, which I try not to use when I do reviews, but obviously if I want to take the last level, I can't be bothered to play the entire game sometimes, just to take the last level. So I sometimes plug in the Game Genie just for that. But it's not the end of the world. I'm reviewing the entire game, and if it's quicker to do that, then that's fine. But that comes obviously with the Game Genie, but also with a booklet, which has some codes in it. It doesn't have all of them, and 20 years ago that might have been a problem, but now with the internet being so massive, it really doesn't matter, because there are so many websites concerned with finding codes for the Game Genie. The final thing I have is a Super Game Boy, which you should know about, but if you don't, it is basically something that lets you play Game Boy games on your Super Nintendo, and it works really well. Now, the one problem I've always had with Nintendo is this whole issue of backwards compatibility. When the Nintendo came out, we were all loving our games, we were all playing them, and then they brought the Game Boy out, and they said, "Oh, you'll be able to play them." Well, we never saw that. Then they brought the Super Nintendo out, and before it came out, they said, "Don't worry, we'll make it backwards compatible. You can play your Nintendo games." Well, that never happened, and then they said, "We'll make a piece of hardware that'll do it." And well, that never happened. The only thing that Nintendo actually ever did right when it comes to backwards compatibility is the Super Game Boy, because then it got to the N64, you know, my nemesis of a console, and they said, don't worry, you can play Super Nintendo games on it. And then it came out and they went, no, you can't. There seems to be this whole problem with backwards compatibility at the moment. I mean, look at the PlayStation 3. I was lucky to get one of the really early ones, so I have a fairly decent sized collection of PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 1 games. And then they changed their minds, and they said, "Oh no, nobody wants backwards compatibility," and didn't realise that all those thousands of screaming people wanted backwards compatibility. So there we are. What are we going to do? But anyway, back to the case in hand. That's just a quick look at some of the hardware I've got. Next we'll be looking at magazines, and then finally we'll get onto my collection of unboxed games when I feel manly enough to tackle it.